Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is our 111th deck and it's titled Mono Blue Gyruda Mill. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we are doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So very quickly, before we get into the actual deck tech itself, I want to take a second to highlight some of our social media accounts, some of the ways you can help support the channel, and of course help us grow at the same time. So first up, you can find us over on Twitter at 13POYNZ. Find us on Reddit, u/POYNZ13. Send us an email, dungeonlearnersguide@gmail.com. All of those are great ways to reach out to me. I try my best to post as many updates as I can, make sure that I'm posting links to the deck lists and to the videos, and of course also just kind of interacting with people. So if you ever have any questions, you just want to chat, those are all great ways to reach out. And if you're looking for ways to support the channel a little bit more directly, you can always, of course, like the video, subscribe to the channel, that does help out. But if you're looking for a little bit more support, you can also find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, where you are able to join the 7 amazing people listed below: William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Calvin Schmidt, Eric Huey, Jeff Winger, Jeffrey Bowes, and Devin Purser. To the 7 of you, thank you all so much. And if you would like to see your name also included in that list, you can head on over to patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide. And once you have subscribed over there, you'll get access to the deck lists a week early. You will get access to a Discord channel where we brew up a lot of the decks and also play the games. So if you want to be in the games on this channel, that is a great way to do it. You'll also get a card sent to you once a month, one of our random cards of the week, as a thank you for all of your support. You'll get access to the unedited gameplay videos so you can hear the players talking and chatting and having a good time, rather than just my own narration over a shortened version of it. And then last but not least, what I personally believe to be the most important part of this is that by subscribing to us over on Patreon, you'll get access to the guarantee from me that any cards you suggest will be turned into a deck tech for the channel at some point. You may have noticed in the past that quite a few of our patrons' names have shown up as our suggested cards. That's because I do my best to take every suggestion that we get, but I can't guarantee that they all get turned into decks for the channel. So if you want to guarantee that your suggestion makes it in, do try to subscribe to us over on Patreon. That is the best way to do it. And of course, we have a couple in the works for some of our patrons already, so stay tuned for that. But I suppose without any further ado, I've done quite enough rambling, so let's get into our deck tech, shall we? So our card of the week this week is a completely random card, not suggested to us. This one is Go-Shintai of Lost Wisdom. So Go-Shintai of Lost Wisdom is 1 and a blue for a 0/4 legendary enchantment creature, Shrine, has flying, and at the beginning of your end step, you may pay 1. When you do, target player mills X cards, where X is the number of shrines you control. So to start off with, normally when you hear Go-Shintai talking about Commander, it's typically the 5-color one, but since our random card is a legendary creature, that means it does have to be our Commander as well. And so in terms of making sure that our Commander is the Go-Shintai of Lost Wisdom, we had to do a little bit of tweaking to the deck to make it a little bit more interesting, because how do we build around Go-Shintai of Lost Wisdom when its ability cares about the number of shrines we control? There's only 3 blue shrines, so there's not much we could do there. However, I found a little bit of a trick around that, and that is that Go-Shintai is not alone in the command zone. We actually have a companion as well, and I know before everybody says it in the comments, I know this is an illegal companion. We can't technically have Gyruda because it does count as a Dimir card. However, it's my deck and I can kind of make the rules, and if people don't like it, then just don't play Gyruda as the companion. Otherwise, the entire deck is still mono blue. There is no black in the deck. There's nothing that breaks that rule. So if you sit down to play with people and you have this deck and they're not a fan of Gyruda in the companion zone, then you just don't play with it. The deck is still complete without it. I just think it's kind of fun to have. But since we have Gyruda in the companion zone, which, by the way, Gyruda is for a blue-black or a blue-black. In this deck, it's all just blue. For a 6/6 Demon Kraken, it has Companion, and the Companion clause is that your starting deck contains only cards with even converted mana costs. since Go-Shintai is 2, we can make that work. Then, when Gyruda enters the battlefield, each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard, put a creature card with an even converted mana cost from among those cards onto the battlefield under your control. So, a lot of this leads us to the question of why exactly do we want Gyruda to work with Go-Shintai? Because that's milling everybody, but it's not really caring about shrines. And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, this is not a technically a mill deck, but it's not a mill deck. So let's talk a little bit about what we're doing, and then I'll explain a little bit further. So the themes that we're going to have to focus on, and the first one that's going to be the most important for this deck, is making sure that we can copy Go-Shintai as a non-legendary creature. So, for example, we have Irenicus's Vile Duplication, which is 3 and a blue for a sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except the token has flying and isn't legendary if that creature is legendary. This is what's going to be incredibly important. Because there's only 3 blue shrines, we need to find a way to make more than 3. And if we can make a token copy of our commander that isn't legendary, that technically means we have 2 shrines in play, and they both have the same text, which means we could pay 2 mana in our end step to mill someone for 2 each, for a total of 4. So once we've got a non-legendary token copy of Go-Shintai, that leads us to theme number 2, which is just straight up clones. We are going to take that non-legendary copy of Go-Shintai and we are going to copy it as many times as possible, with the end goal having a full board full of Go-Shintai, so that way when we go to pay for its ability in our end step, each one that we're paying for is milling for 5, 6, maybe 7 plus cards every single time, turning us essentially into a mill deck without actually having any real mill other than our commander and, I guess, to a lesser extent, Gyruda. So those are the 2 most important themes, but of course we do have to have a third theme as well, and in this case it's going to be protecting the Go-Shintai. Because there's not a ton of ways to make a non-legendary Go-Shintai, we need to make sure that we protect that non-legendary copy at all costs. So we are running cards like Mirror Shield, which is 2 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +0/+2 and has hexproof, and whenever a creature with Death Touch blocks or becomes blocked by this creature, destroy that creature, equip for 2. So this guarantees that it can't die to any targeted removal. Yeah, someone could still cast a board wipe and get rid of it, but we are running protection in the form of counter spells as well, so hopefully we can kind of keep our board if that's the case. But really, we just want to make sure that nobody gets rid of the non-legendary copy. And as soon as we've got one non-legendary copy and we've started copying that one, it becomes a little less relevant, but it is always nice to make sure that we have one of them protected at any given time, because there's not that many ways to make a non-legendary copy, at least at an even mana cost. There are some ways at an odd mana cost, but because of Gyruda, we can't put them in the deck. So we have to be very careful about protecting Go-Shintai. So that is the major idea of the deck. Those are our themes, which then of course leads us to our key cards in the deck. These are the cards that are incredibly important, not counting Irenicus's Vile Duplication, because that one's also incredibly important. But the idea here is that we want to use these cards to kind of advance our boards to help us win the game, and while they may not win the game individually, they're going to help us get there. So the first of our key cards is going to be Strionic Resonator. So Strionic Resonator, 2 mana for an artifact. You can pay 2, tap it, copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Since Go-Shintai's ability is a triggered ability, it triggers in the end step, we can use Strionic Resonator to copy it. Now, it is important to note that it's going to copy the effect that says you may pay 1 if you do mill people. So we do have to pay an extra 1 mana to do it. So essentially for 4 mana, we can activate Go-Shintai twice. And that doesn't seem like a lot because it's 4 mana. We might just want to do something else. But sometimes that's all we really need. And there's also a lot of other triggered abilities in the deck that we can benefit with Strionic Resonator. But the main one is definitely going to be Go-Shintai. It could also be Gyruda if we wanted to use this on Gyruda, because Gyruda enters the battlefield, triggering an ability, but most of the time, like I said, it's probably going to be Go-Shintai. Our second key card is a little bit different. This one is Helm of the Host. Again, another way to make a non-legendary token copy. Helm of the Host, 4 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary. If equipped creature is legendary, that token gains haste, equipped for 5. So Helm of the Host means that every single turn we are making a new non-legendary token copy of Go-Shintai, and that way we're able to kind of churn out a huge board state very, very quickly, because not only are we making one free copy a turn every time we go to combat, but we're also still able to cast our clone effects, we're able to use Trionic Resonator, we're able to do a bunch of things to keep growing our board and make sure that no matter what we're doing, we always have more shrines in play. And then finally, that leads us to our last key card, which is Dead-Eye Navigator. Another great way to protect Go-Shintai, because Dead-Eye Navigator is 4 blue for a 5/5 spirit. It's got Soul Bond, so you may pair this creature with another unpaired creature when either enters the battlefield. They remain paired for as long as you control both of them, and as long as Dead-Eye Navigator is paired with another creature, each of those creatures has pay 2, exile this creature, then return it to the battlefield under your control. So we can use this to blink and return a legendary Go-Shintai or maybe a clone, but really the value is in the clones, because if we're blinking a clone, we can change what it enters the battlefield as. So yeah, we can use it to protect Go-Shintai, which is great. We can use it to rebuy Gyruda's Enter the Battlefield effect, but it's really nice for when we need to change one of our clones to something else that's in play, because now we just pay 2 mana, we get rid of the clone, bring it back, and now it is something else. So Dead-Eye Navigator is incredibly important because it allows us to change up our game plan as the game itself changes, which is not something that most decks are capable of doing. So those are our 3 key cards for this week, and the next thing we've got to do for this deck tech is take a look at some cool interactions. These are some cards that synergize very well together, and often are cards that I just like to highlight because I think they're kind of cool. So the first cool interaction that I want to talk about is between Astral Dragon and Machine God's Effigy. So Astral Dragon, one of the best clones in the entire deck. It is 6 blue, so a massive 8 mana for a 4/4 dragon with flying, and it has Project Image. When Astral Dragon enters the battlefield, create 2 tokens that are copies of target non-creature permanent, except they are 3/3 dragon creatures in addition to their other types, and they have flying. So we are going to pair that up with Machine God's Effigy, which is 4 mana for an artifact. You may have Machine God's Effigy enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it's an artifact and it has tap, add blue. Notably, if you see the parentheses there, it says it's not a creature, which means that Astral Dragon can come in and copy Machine God's Effigy, making 2 3/3 dragon copies of Machine God's Effigy. But those 2 3/3 dragons do enter the battlefield, which means that they can actually enter the battlefield as a Machine God's Effigy, which could enter the battlefield as a copy of Astral Dragon, meaning that the new token copies make additional Astral Dragons, which make additional 3/3 dragons, which make additional Machine God's Effigy, and it continues as many times as you want, essentially creating an infinite loop that only ends when you choose to end it, because you can just choose something else that's on the battlefield, so that way you don't have to do that with Machine God's Effigy. But that gives you an infinite amount of tokens, which they are 3/3 dragons in the end. They're 3/3 dragons and artifacts, which is kind of cool. And they all tap for a blue mana, which means you could get access to infinite mana. Now, the most important part of this is that they don't have haste, so that is something to be aware of, but in the end, you still wind up with a bunch of dragons, and honestly, that's kind of cool on its own. So I just wanted to highlight that. I think that's a super sweet synergy, although it's not instantly winning the game. It's most likely winning you the game unless someone can find a response. So that is cool interaction number 1. And then cool interaction number 2 is going to be between Flood of Tears and Archaeomancer. So Flood of Tears, one of my personal favorite board wipes for mono blue. It is 4 blue for a sorcery. Return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. If you return 4 or more non-token permanents you control this way, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. And then hopefully what we're going to do is put our Chaomancer onto the battlefield with the Flood of Tears, because our Chaomancer is 2 blue for a 1/2 human wizard. When our Chaomancer enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Essentially, what we're able to do is cast the Flood of Tears, return everything that people control to their hands, put our Chaomancer back into play, and then all of a sudden we can return the Flood of Tears from our graveyard to our hand, meaning that we can do the exact same thing next turn. And yeah, we might not have 4 non-land permanents at that point, but if we're bouncing the Archaeomancer, recasting it, maybe we have other stuff we can play, it starts to kind of lock out the rest of the table, because no matter what they play, we're going to be able to keep bouncing it, make sure that they don't really get to keep a board presence. So unless they have haste, they're not really doing damage. Unless they have enter the battlefield effects, they're not really getting any value. So this isn't the nicest of combinations, but it is worth mentioning because it is something that could show up in a game. But those are our cool interactions. And the last thing we're going to have to do for this deck tech is, of course, take a look at the budget. So this week, the budget came out to $93.57 out of a max of $100, with the most expensive card being Spark Double. Once again, another way to make a non-legendary Go-Shintai. Spark Double is 3 and a blue for a 0/0 illusion. You may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, it enters with an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker, and it isn't legendary if that permanent is legendary. So this is just a 4-mana clone that comes in as Go-Shintai, except it's non-legendary, and it gets a +1/+1 counter. So notably, this is one of the few permanent effects that can actually make a non-legendary token copy, or I guess in this case it's not a token. Most of them make non-legendary token copies. That's probably why I slipped up a bit. So it's important to realize that this is pretty expensive, but it is also very important for what the deck is trying to do, because we do need to make sure we have non-legendary copies of things. Otherwise, our plan really doesn't work, because we could copy Go-Shintai and then the copy just dies and we got nowhere. So Spark Double is incredibly important to the deck. However, if you do need to cut it for budget purposes, this trims it down to about $84, which is a lot more manageable, but it's still pretty high if we're being perfectly honest. On the other hand, though, if you're looking to actually increase the price of the deck, I have an out-of-budget upgrade that I would suggest for you to put in, and I have a card that I would recommend taking out. So the out-of-budget upgrade that I would put into this deck, if I still had the space in the budget, is Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. So Sakashima is 3 and a blue for a 3/1 legendary creature, human rogue. You may have Sakashima of 1,000 Faces enter the battlefield as a copy of another creature you control, except it has Sakashima of 1,000 Faces' other ability, which is the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. So the important part about this Sakashima is that we can copy our legendary Go-Shintai and still get to keep the copies, because they're not going to die for being legends that have the same name. Now, that does leave us open to the fact that if someone removes Sakashima, it also removes all of our legendary copies, which is a bit risky. So we do still want to focus on making non-legendary copies as well, but this would be another redundant way to make non-legendary Go-Shintais, and Sakashima itself can enter as a copy of Go-Shintai, so that would be pretty perfect for what we're trying to do. However, it is almost $25, so we couldn't justify spending a quarter of our budget just on Sakashima. And so if you're looking to put Sakashima into the deck, I would recommend taking out Mirror of the Forebears, which is 2 mana for an artifact. As Mirror of the Forebears enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Pay 1 until end of turn. Mirror of the Forebears becomes a copy of target creature you control of the chosen type, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Now, we do have a ton of creatures in the deck that would be perfect for Mirror of the Forebears, but because we're not exactly a themed deck, we're not built around one specific type of creature, this doesn't quite work, because after some of my testing, I believe that the final result is that Shrine is not a creature type, which means that we can't actually copy Go-Shintai with Mirror of the Forebears, meaning that its main purpose in the deck doesn't quite work the way that I want it to. And that's not to say that there aren't still great targets. I mean, Astral Dragon is a perfect target for this, but because it's already in play, you don't get a lot of the enter the battlefield effects, so I really don't think it shines quite as much in this deck as it could in some other decks. So if you're able to swap in Sakashima and swap out Mirror of the Forebears, I would highly recommend it, but because of the price difference, it doesn't make sense otherwise. So that is my only suggestion for the out-of-budget upgrades. And the last thing we've got to do, now that we're completely done with our deck tech, is of course take a look at how this deck could perform in a game. So we are going to run this deck up against 3 separate opponents, and we're going to see just how well we can copy Go-Shintai. So this week, we are being joined by Fate, who is playing Progenitus, AngryCow, who is playing Narset, Enlightened Master, and Doodle, who is playing Sarevok, Deathbringer, and Raised by Giants. So starting off with Fate, this was actually my very first game with Fate, and Fate is going to be playing a Progenitus Hydra deck. So he is playing 5-color Hydras, just wants to play as many big, beefy creatures as possible, and just kind of swing into his opponents and do a ton of damage. And this is very much my style of deck, so I am very excited for this deck. Next up, we have Cow playing Narset, Enlightened Master, and I'll be perfectly honest up front, this is easily the deck that I am the most worried about at the table. I've never seen a Narset deck not quote-unquote do the thing. It tends to just be, extra turns, extra combats, free value, free spells, and I don't expect Cows to be really any different. I know that he's focusing very heavily on big spells, but even just being able to play 4 free cards a turn is incredibly powerful, and Narset having Hexproof is just somehow an absolutely back-breaking combo, so we'll see how that one goes, but that is easily the deck I'm the most worried about. And then finally we have Doodle playing Sarevok and Raised by Giants, and this is a Golgari Fog deck, so he kind of wants to make sure that nobody is doing any real combat damage, and being able to use Sarevok, which at the beginning of each player's end step, if no permanents left the battlefield this turn, that player loses X life, where X is Sarevok's power, starting off at 3, but because of Raised by Giants, it actually becomes 10. So as long as he's able to lock down the board and make sure that combat really isn't happening, he can prevent people from forcing opponents to leave the battlefield and force their permanents to leave the battlefield, and therefore he's able to drain each opponent by 10 every single turn and just kind of slowly grind out the game. So this is a deck that Doodle's been talking about for quite a while, but I haven't actually had the pleasure of playing against, so I am very excited to see how it works, and hopefully he'll be able to do some stuff, but again, still keep my eye on that Narset. So hopefully you all enjoy the game. I'm sure that I will, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Fate goes first, followed by myself, AngryCow, and then Doodle. On Fate's first turn, he plays a forest. I play an island. Cow plays a Swiftwater Cliffs, gaining a life. Doodle plays a forest, then casts Gilded Goose, making a food token. Fate plays a forest. I play an island and cast my commander Go-Shintai of Lost Wisdom, letting me pay 1 in my end step to mill target opponent for X, where X is the number of shrines I control. Cow plays a Tranquil Cove, gaining a life. Doodle plays a Rogue's Passage, then casts Font of Fertility. Fate plays a Plains. I play an island, then in my end step, I pay a mana to mill Cow for 1. Cow plays a Shivan Reef. Doodle plays a Blighted Woodlands, then casts his commander Sarevok Deathbringer, making each player lose life equal to his power in their end step if a permanent didn't leave the battlefield this turn. Luckily for Doodle, he had to sacrifice a food to cast Sarevok, so he avoids this trigger. Fate plays a mountain, then casts a Feral Hydra for X equals 3 so that it comes in with 3 +1/+1 counters. At the end of turn, Fate loses 3 life since no permanents left the battlefield this turn, but since I don't want to suffer the same fate, I cast Resculpt, exiling Sarevok and giving Doodle a 4/4 elemental token instead. In response, Doodle casts Deadly Rollick for free since he controls his commander, exiling my commander Go-Shintai. On my turn, I unfortunately miss my 4th land drop, so I put Gyruda into my hand from the companion zone and pass. Cow plays an island and casts Ghostly Prison, making any player pay 2 mana to attack him. Doodle plays a Woodland Chasm, then casts Sakura Tribe Elder, followed up by casting a Haywire Might. Fate plays a Forest, and then casts a Morph creature. I play an island and recast my commander Go-Shintai. Cow plays a Temple of the False God, then casts his commander Narset Enlightened Master, allowing him to exile the top 4 cards of his library when she attacks, and cast any number of non-creature spells from among them without paying their mana costs until the end of turn. Then at the end of turn, Doodle sacrifices his Sakura Tribe Elder, searching his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. Then on his turn, he sacrifices Font of Fertility to search his library for another basic land, putting that also into play tapped. Fate plays a Forest, then casts Garruk's Uprising, giving his creatures trample and letting him draw a card when a creature with 4 or more power enters the battlefield under his control. I play an island and cast Irenicus's Vile Duplication, creating a non-legendary token copy of Go-Shintai. This allows me in my end step to pay 1 mana and mill Fate for 2, since I now control 2 shrines. In Cow's upkeep, Doodle makes a food token with his Golden Goose, then Cow moves straight to combat, attacking me for 3 with Narset, exiling Vanish into Eternity, Leadership Vacuum, Temple of Epiphany, and a Plains. Then I block Narset with the real Go-Shintai, taking no damage. In Cow's second main phase, he plays a Plains, then casts Metallurgic Summonings, letting him make an XX construct whenever he casts an instant or sorcery, where X is the mana value of the spell. He also casts Leadership Vacuum, returning Go-Shintai to the command zone, drawing a card and making a 3/3 construct. Finally, he casts Vanish into Eternity, exiling Garruk's Uprising and making another 3/3. On Doodle's turn, he sacrifices his Haywire Might to exile Metallurgic Summonings and gain 2 life. Then he casts Damnation, sacrificing his food to do so, destroying all creatures. In response though, Cow casts Slip Out the Back, putting a +1/+1 counter on Narset and phasing her out, saving her from the board wipe. Fate plays a Forest, then casts Ulvenwald Hydra, searching his library for a land, in this case a Path of Ancestry, putting it into play tapped. On my turn, I cast Clever Impersonator, coming in as a copy of Ulvenwald Hydra, letting me also search my library for a land and put it into play tapped, getting a Temple of the False God. Cow once again moves straight to combat, attacking Doodle for 4 with Narset, exiling Time Warp, Thousand Year Storm, God Eternal Kefnet, and a Plains. In his second main phase, he casts the Thousand Year Storm, letting him copy an instant or sorcery he casts X times, where X is the number of instants and sorceries cast before it this turn. Once that's resolved, he casts Ugin's Insight, scrying 6 since the highest mana value among permanents he controls is 6, then drawing 3 cards. Once that's resolved, he plays a Mountain and casts Reckless Charge, copying it once, giving Narset haste and a total of +6/+0. While that doesn't do anything right now, it does let him cast Time Warp, copying it twice and taking a grand total of 3 extra turns after this one. Cow then passes to himself and immediately goes to combat, attacking Doodle for 4, exiling 1 with the Multiverse, Shelter, Izzet Guildgate, and in Bolus's Clutches. At this point, Cow is able to cast Volcanic Vision to return Time Warp from his graveyard to his hand, and by also casting Shelter, Teferi's Time Twist, and Reckless Charge, before casting the Time Warp, he's able to take another 5 extra turns. This is a clear sign to all of us that we won't get another turn, so we all decide to concede, winning Cow the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. I definitely called it right in the beginning though. Narset doing her thing, able to go off, taking 8 extra turns for Cow, which was very, very impressive considering he only actually cast an extra turn spell twice. So Narset just doing Narset things. Not a super big surprise, but it was still pretty cool to watch it happen. Otherwise, I think Doodle's deck also did a very good job of showcasing what it wanted to do. He was able to kind of start making people lose life with Saravok very quickly, and I think that if I hadn't had the removal spell for it, he would have started to kind of lock down the game. So I'd be definitely interested to play against that deck again in the future and see what it can do. Next up, Fate and his Progenitus deck also didn't quite get to do too much, unfortunately. He got a little bit stuck on mana. He got very upset at me when I milled him because I milled over the World Tree, which could have fixed his mana perfectly. So a little bit of a mistake on my part, but I had no way of knowing what was coming up. So hopefully next time that Fate and I get a game in, he'll be able to not mill the World Tree and hopefully actually be able to cast some of his spells. So otherwise, a great showing. And then finally, our deck, we did what we wanted to do, but we weren't quite fast enough. We stumbled a little bit on mana very, very early on, missing our third land drop, or fourth, one of them. And so we weren't able to get a non-legendary Go-Shintai as quickly as I wanted, and then, being able to hold up interaction and things like that. So not quite the showing I wanted, but I think that it showed a little bit of the cornerstones of what the deck really wanted to do. And I think other than the board wipe and, of course, Narset taking a billion turns, it did very well. And I think that it showed that it has the ability to do very strong things. So hopefully Go-Shintai of Lost Wisdom can put in some work. If this is a deck you are interested in putting together, I would love to hear your stories of how the deck works and maybe some suggestions you have to upgrade it, because obviously I don't know every Magic card that exists. So if you have cards you think would be good fits for this, please do let me know. I would love to hear them. Otherwise, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. I appreciate that more than you know, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.